what we think that we can do is leveraging the way that we've built out our library of tests and we've built out this data. We think that we can use this new tech, LLMs, to essentially enable that type of reinforcement learning spidering, but in a far smarter way that's going to enable us to scale. And so that's sort of what we're focused on now.
Okay, great. And then maybe you can just talk about, what you actually have done with generative AI and what problems are you trying to solve using this new technology?
The problems really are around like how can we automate tests as quickly as possible and that are reliable, that you don't have to be an expert to build. So we started off by building our own library of tests to handle this ERP system, finance and operations. And right from the bat, this helped companies automate like 80% of the tests straight away, right? Like they could pick up our tests, they could configure them, and boom, they're off to the races. The problem is for the remaining tests that had like customization or that were feeding into other data systems, those we still had to essentially manually build. And that was like, it's expensive and time consuming and had all the problems of what I've just talked about. We were getting rid of 80% of that annoyance, but keeping that like 10, 20% that was still left over. We've built out a couple of ways that we're using LLMs at the moment. We're allowing users to build tests automatically from descriptions. So rather than them having to record or build it themselves, they're typing in what the test should do. And it's using our LLM it's essentially a fine-tuned GPT model at the moment to automatically like build that out with some nuanced understanding of their actual application. We've done some basic spidering. Now that enables them to create tests faster, but it's not as robust as we'd like. So what we're looking at now is fully moving into that improved spider, which is really very similar to what that Test.ai company was doing, except we're using a fine-tuned LLM as an oracle for that iterative process. We're using that to almost have a context-driven reinforcement learning where the model understands the website that is under test. So we're creating that reward function for the spider. And then because we understand what the test is supposed to do, it's actually constantly self-training itself. So it's improving itself as it sees the spider work and as it sees it get through the application. And we think that that's going to essentially enable us to build out tests automatically. And then we're going to further leverage the same model to really help with the additional annoyances of tests. How can we fix them? How can we keep them more reliable in a way that wasn't possible without this technology? And we've already seen like a huge improvement in terms of like how we can reduce the time that it takes for these companies to get that last 10%. And that we think that once we finish this, we'll essentially remove the need for any human interaction during this implementation phase, which will just be a massive win for these companies.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems like a big margin booster and, eliminating a barrier to scalability for the TestSmart itself. But for the end customer, what is improved for them? Is it faster time to do the test, so faster time to market? Does it also improve the overall quality? Or
you can imagine you do not want your ERP system to crash. It's powering almost your entire business. So that has to be stable. But at the same stage, if you're in the finance team, you're so busy during the year. You've got various end of quarters, end of months, bills going out. You don't have the time to actually sit down there and build tests. You don't have the time to run those tests. So this is taking away that entire effort from that company, but still keeping their system that is critical to the business operational. So it's a huge time saver for them.
Look, I mean, popular press, investment circles, you name it. I mean, ChatGPT is all the rage these days, and there's a ton of tools coming to market. Is this hype real? And can anyone adopt this technology and be successful? And if not, like what are the elements that companies need to have to adopt this technology and be successful?
GPT is definitely like incredibly impressive, but the demos are very easy to make. And we've seen this technology go wrong, like the hallucinations that can come out of it. But our advisor, Catherine's actually sort of head of AI implementation now for Twilio, right? So she's trying to find the right use for this technology, but that's actually been more difficult. This technology that you think can improve everything because of the need for reliability in production systems, it's actually been difficult for them to find the right use cases for it, for them to move forward initially. They cannot risk introducing an AI-powered system into production that might like decrease a customer's marketing performance, which is sort of what they're focused on. So instead, they've sort of pivoted to, rather than it providing recommendations on that area or even actioning recommendations. They're focused on it actually working to help programmers integrate with their solutions so that they can get more buy-in from their programmers. And like I said, the errors and the hallucinations are common for these systems based on the way LLMs work, right? They're trying to predict the next word based on the context. And so even if the chance of that next word being incorrect is very, very low, as you do this over multiple times and you've got a larger and larger context window, the chance of a mistake obviously like increases as well. And that sort of prevents LLMs from being used in certain circumstances.
Does this mean that, certain applications or certain industries are going to be better suited for this technology?
I think so. So if we look at the three main issues with LLMs, we've got data, and that's both the amount of data that you have to train on and the level of expertise in that data. You've also got like the context window, so you can't throw the entire question sometimes within a context window, and then you've got these errors or hallucinations. So these challenges, like I said, prevent some applications, just like I was talking about with what Catherine had, right? She cannot have something go wrong in production, which is this critical to a business. And so I think it's going to be more recommendations than actual actions as well. Like recommending something is fine because you're not saying that it's 100% correct, you're sort of recommending it. But for our use case, I actually think that because we're running on a test system, like we're testing a system, we're running on their test environment, there's less risk. We're limiting the risk in that way. We're also creating our tests from an oracle that's powered by an LLM. It's creating tests with an expected outcome. We know if we're creating a sales order test, that at the end of that test, there should be a sales order in the sales order list. So we know the outcome. So we can have the LLM essentially like iterate and retrain itself as it goes through so that it gets to that outcome. So it's different from it just answering a question. Instead, we're asking it to like almost plan how to get to this outcome. And then if it doesn't get there, we're telling it to restart. In doing that, we're again limiting the risk, and we're essentially ensuring that if it gets to the outcome, that it is correct, which again is like a different use case, which we think is like very apt for this type of technology.
And then going back to the kind of competition issue and all the startups coming out. And look, I don't think we're aware of any other testing company that has embraced LLMs quite like you, but I'm sure they're going to come, right? So what's the TestSmart's moat, and what prevents other companies from catching up to you?
It's sort of what you said before. You can put GPT on almost anything now, and it looks super impressive in a demo, but is it production quality? And we're embedding our models into the core of our system and using it in a way where it is going to create a correct answer rather than it actually like just create a recommendation. And that type of use case is very different to what everyone else is doing. If we look at like our team, I've been playing with AI now for, God, a long time, 6 years. And I've got a patent in AI focused on risk mitigation and like essentially determining which tests to run based on certain scenarios. And our principal AI researcher, this is where I was super happy when he decided to join, and it sort of like dates me, but he worked at IBM for 30 years and he was one of the principal AI researchers on IBM Watson, it conquered Jeopardy. I remember as a kid, that was like a big deal. So we have at least a pedigree in this area that we think that we can build on top of, and we understand the technology and the problems that you sort of have to get past in a way that, slapping GPT on top of something doesn't really provide. And then like the main thing is the proprietary data that we're working with. We've been essentially harvesting this data now from companies for a while. We've got this library of pre-built tests, and most other companies or new startups aren't going to have this. We're in a super fortunate position where we've got this model that we're able to train on very specific ERP data that we know is correct and which is very complex. ERPs are very complicated systems. And all of the recent papers have shown that you can build models far faster than expected with high quality data without errors. Also, like that has that level of expertise. The way of looking at it is that like you can't expect your model to answer PhD chemistry questions if it was trained on 5th grade science. So our model's been trained on that PhD chemistry data, which not everyone's going to have. In fact, I don't think anyone else has it in the same way that we do. So our data is novel. The usage of our model is very different to just putting it like there's a phrase, lipstick on a pig, I think is the phrase that I'm looking for. We're going to be far more accurate than those general models. And it's almost in a way similar to the way SaaS products have sort of gone into these niches where they can provide more value. By focusing on this ERP, we're going to be able to essentially be very, very precise and provide more value, and then accelerate out of that as we go.
I especially like that concept of the data moat. I mean, it's almost shocking how quickly the UI layer has commodified, and even these models that people thought were almost impossible to develop 9 months ago. I mean, now there's dozens and dozens of open source models available for free today in just 9 months' time. So I really like that concept. Maybe just zooming out a little bit, maybe just kind of talk about your personal views on the software and technology industry at large. Who do you think is going to win the AI race, and what is quote unquote winning?
I think for like investors, it's probably making money. For me, it's creating something that is like really interesting. So there's like different definitions of winning. I think if you look at like the largest players, Google looks like it's a step behind Microsoft, right? And OpenAI. But their new Gemini model, which is combining a lot of what they've done to like some of their other products within their Bard system, I think is going to be really interesting and might actually leapfrog. Microsoft have put out some very interesting papers recently, actually, which strangely are focused on open source. So they're not focused on the OpenAI, they're focused on how can we train models faster, how can we create better data to create smaller models. So I think that those two seem to be the furthest ahead, along with obviously OpenAI. I think Facebook is like a little bit further behind them. They seem to be always surprised that you can get this level of emergent abilities from such large data sets. And something that I thought of just recently, I don't think NVIDIA will win in the same way that it's winning now, right? Like NVIDIA, everyone has bought into like, you have to build these bigger and bigger models. And I'm seeing Microsoft release stuff about how small models can be built. I'm seeing OpenAI show papers on how you can now leverage GPT to create better synthetic data to then train a model, which again is smaller and smaller. And we're seeing the open source community train on far less hardware than what like OpenAI has. So I think at the moment, everyone needs the hardware. But I think later on, these smaller models are going to become more and more important that have specialized data sets and are doing specialized things. I think those are going to end up being winners, and that NVIDIA will become less important because of that.
And then how about OpenAI? Because I mean, they were perceived as the big winner. I guess they were the big winner, just a few months ago. But we were talking earlier about it sounds like you're investigating. You're built on GPT-3 now. It sounds like you're evaluating open source models for your next iteration of your own custom model. So just like to hear what's out there in the open source, and if they're up to snuff yet for use cases like yours.
So what's interesting is a lot of this, if you read a lot of the papers about GPT, they do incredibly well in sort of like the scores for various tests, right? And the open models have caught up. It's frustrating that it's called OpenAI, and then we have to talk about open source models. But the open source models have caught up a lot, and there's actually new techniques for how we can retrain those, and also how we can use different prompting strategies, getting it to check its own work, provide steps as to why it's doing these things that can boost them up to the same level of performance as these GPT models. In fact, there are 3 models that have passed a recent Python programming test, and GPT-4 was one of them. And then another one was one that Microsoft built that is 1,000th of the size of GPT-4, and GPT-3 didn't pass this test. And it was just based on the very specialized data. So they had incredibly good data. They've just focused it on that. I think that, at least from our point of view, we've been able to make incredible gains very quickly with GPT-4. Now we're seeing that we can have almost those same gains from our own open source model that we can have more control over. You're limited, and there's costs associated with doing multiple calls to GPT-4. You're limited in the size of your context window. Whereas we can train our own model with a larger context window with specialized data, and it's essentially going to perform better, and we'll have more control of it in the future. But for that, you actually need the expertise. Yeah. You can't, it's sort of different.
Definitely beyond my skill set, that's for sure.
I thought you're a coder now that you've got GPT.
Yeah, I would put my probably a D+ coder at best. Okay, cool. So look, James, I think we're going to put you on the hot seat now and open the forum to questions. So if anyone has a question, I guess digitally raise your hand or however you do it on Zoom.
Maybe I could jump in, David, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I'm just a passenger for these types of AI technologies. So it's always helpful to hear experts in the field. One question is, everybody talks about the software, but the hardware that runs the AI also seems to be really accelerating. And the only company I can speak to is really NVIDIA, and because they sort of hit some massive market valuation. Can you just talk us through a little bit about, is that gating for you, or is hardware way in advance of needs?
No, it's definitely not. When I talked about NVIDIA, they have hit that huge valuation recently because there is an incredible demand for their latest GPUs, right? The reason why I see that changing is because the power of their GPUs is actually increasing at an incredible rate. They think that it's going to be 10 times more powerful in the next few years than what it is now, so we'll need fewer. We also are sort of running out of data to train the biggest models on. There's only, I think GPT-4 was trained on a quarter of the internet. So there's not a huge amount more other than starting to create synthetic data for us to have to use. And that limits how much they can grow. Sure, more companies might need those cores or might need those GPUs, but that's going to be a question of how many people enter this field. And there are companies now, at least we're using one now, that allow you to rent those GPUs for your training and then essentially hand them back. And so I think that there will be essentially a ramp up now as we need these, and then later it will fall off as we sort of don't need them as much. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think that's James putting a sell rating on NVIDIA stock right here.
I know.
But in a year and a half.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm gonna start calling on people on the next call. We want we got to put them in the hot seat and give them the tough questions, but I'll let you guys off today. But James, thank you so much for the presentation, and David, thank you for facilitating. That was great to see the insights into AI. And I was just having this discussion with someone this morning. If you tried to raise money today on AI, most investors would say, that's old news. We don't do that anymore. So it's amazing to see TestSmart kind of taking AI to the next level, having already have started to build a generative and LLM models and data training before ChatGPT came out. So it really allowed them to hit the ground running when that application came out and scale up as probably one of the fastest scale up applications of that type of technology. It's excellent to see. And we look forward to seeing how you grow over the next few years.
Appreciate it.
And Summer gave a great comment. So we'll just say that means that she thinks it's really good technology.
It's really, really hard to not speak as a Microsoft person, but I can't express any opinion, let's put it in that way, that represents Microsoft in any shape or form. So I have to start with, this is my personal opinion. But there's one comment is that when there was a question around whether this is going to be in specific industries, I have to say, no, it's not, because it's going to be embedded in the applications. You won't even know it's there. It's already there. It's under your applications. You're probably using a lot of apps on your phone that has the generative AI behind it. You had no idea, and you probably don't want to know. On the hardware as well, we probably, as Microsoft, we're opening a new data center every 3 days. Just so you know, this is the average. There are a few cases where the data is huge, so we are needing to use quantum computing, and we're using them in specific cases and use cases. It's massive, and it's here to stay. It's not something that just a fashion, because it's going to be included in your Teams chat and your Office discussions. We are testing all it's out in the Copilot. All the coding is the Copilot is out there. Coders now are using generative AI. Word documents, PowerPoints, everything you're using on your computer. If you're using Microsoft, there's generative AI either already behind it or is going to be behind it. But that's it. That's all I can say, I guess, at this point. And well done, James. Honestly, again, it's personal opinion. I can't be biased. You're a partner. It's a great work. The testing solutions that you're offering is absolutely an edge, and it's showing customers how they can move way faster without the effort. I've seen what the effort means when they're doing the testing. TestSmart is definitely making it much easier.
Thanks, Matt. I completely like Microsoft has embraced this in a way that like I don't think Google and the others sort of expected. And I just saw recently there was a GPT like Windows plugin that literally will now control your Windows from essentially like a chatbot. So they're doing some incredible work. I think it's different for a large company and how they can enable GPT compared to like startups, right? Like we, in general, a startup can't compete with Microsoft on that level with embedding something into Teams because they've just got such a head start. But there are areas where I think that startups can compete.
Thank you, James. David?
Yeah, thanks. Hey, James, can you explain, I'm a bit new to some of this, but what does your revenue model look like in time?
What do you mean in terms of like what our expected ARR is over the next period?
Yeah, like what, help me understand the nature of your revenue stream and, you know, who's paying you and what kind of relationships do you have with those folks that are paying you? And yeah, just kind of at a macro level, what does that revenue model look like?
Yeah, so we essentially are a usage-based model. So because we're generating tests for these companies, we essentially charge a per test cost along with like our platform cost, right? So our average customer is spending about $30,000 a year on our product. The companies that we're going after are usually that sort of like medium-sized business and above all the way up to enterprise. Our biggest customer is Home Depot.
Okay.
And we've seen like essentially like pretty good stickiness in terms of once we're in there and we've shown the capabilities that they add tests to us. So we've had quite a lot of upgrades recently where they've seen, oh yeah, it works here. Well, we'd like to now add maybe some additional testing to verify that the Salesforce also works flowing data into FinOps. We're moving towards a partner model where, if you can imagine, these ERP systems have incredible partner networks on top of them, right? Like selling the systems, building on top of them in terms of ISVs or applications. So we are starting to work towards that, and we're seeing a shift in revenue and also towards higher value customers by making that shift towards like a partnership model. That's actually how we got Home Depot. We wouldn't have got through their somewhat grueling like onboarding unless it had been pushed through a partner where they'd seen us as a different company. Yeah. Is
there a point, James, where this, you know, it sounds to me a little bit kind of project-based selling, project. Does this ultimately become ingrained in your customers' operations and become more of a, you know, recurring revenue, subscription type revenue model in time, or will it forever be a project-based sale?
I mean, it is recurring revenue. We are, because the ERP system is constantly being updated. If I look at Microsoft's one, they update it 8 times a year. We are recurring revenue where we plug it in, we connect it to their system, and then, you know, it runs on every single upgrade. We're looking to expand our usage outside of these like primary ERPs to cover more and more, and that's where we're getting the updates or the upgrades.
Okay, great, thank you. That's helpful, James.
James, what's the view that you're hearing from your customers about this kind of GPT and AI technologies that are coming out when they're looking at your platform? Are they concerned about? Is they concerned about safety, reliability, or, you know, they want you to use it or not? What is the view that you're hearing from customers?
So honestly, it's mostly been excitement because of the way that we're utilizing it. It's very low risk for us to essentially build out these tests and then be able to verify that it's created the data because we have that outcome. We know that it should be creating that sales order. And then we do essentially like send through all the details to them so that they can see the actual interaction of the tests and verify it themselves. They're just not having to put in that big manual effort themselves. They're essentially just verifying that the results look correct. So we're seeing it as like there's just a huge amount of positivity on sort of like GPT models. or LLMs in general. It's always surprising.